to a very blustery and stormy Midlands of Ireland. We're currently in the middle of Storm Aidan. Last night was interesting. It's not particularly bad, it's just the wind would keep you awake, and you might be able to get a sense for the windy noise at the moment. Today we're going to look at a paper from Quaternary Science Reviews, volume 248, 15th of November 2020 is the publication release date, but the article is available online at the moment. And the title of the paper is Hominin Site Distributions and Behaviours Across the Mid-Pleistocene Climate Transition in China, and it's by Xijie Yang et al. So we've got a number of researchers from China, and then the end author is Michael Petralia. Okay, so some of these papers are doing now what's called highlights. So if you go to the link in the description, you'll be able to see it for yourself. And it basically has a number of bullet points that kind of summarizes all the paper does in a very short few sentences. So here we've got an up-to-date review of the early and middle Pleistocene hominin record of China. So this is similar to the one about Georgia, only this time it's including the early and middle Pleistocene record. Hominin site distributions change across mid-Pleistocene climate transition. Technological innovations occurred in the mid-Pleistocene transition and afterwards. And then the shifts across the middle Pleistocene transition indicate that early hominins were affected by and responded to ecosystem changes. So this is really promising. It's a nice little paper now. So let's have a look at the abstract then. So knowledge about the early and middle Pleistocene hominin record in China is steadily increasing owing to the ongoing implementation of paleoanthropological survey and excavations. Yet, relative little attention has been paid to the effects of climate variability on hominin populations in China and its influence on the archaeological site distributions and hominin behaviours. The Mid-Pleistocene climate transition, or the MPT for short, dating to between 1.2 million and 700,000 years ago in Eastern Asia, is characterized by significant changes in the length and intensity of glacial interglacial cycles and in monsoon intensity and terrestrial conditions, which have been implicated in influencing the occupational history of basins within China. Here, the MPT, or the Mid-Pleistocene transition, is examined relative to the archaeological site distributions across China to determine potential long-term geographic and behavioural effects on hominin populations before, during and after this critical period. Changes in the geographic distribution of hominins are demonstrated across the MPT, the Mid-Pleistocene transition, with significant shifts in the number of sites in high and low latitudes, likely as a response to changing ecosystems. Technological innovations, including the development of large cutting tools, occur in the MPT and afterwards, possibly as a response to the formation of open habitats in South China. Geographic and behavioural shifts in the hominin record challenge traditional views about the long-term conservative nature of the biological and cultural evolution of hominins in Eastern Asia, and instead demonstrate dynamic responses of population to ecosystem changes across the early and middle Pleistocene. So that's the abstract, and do you know what? We're going to be sick in the teeth for any future readings of abstract papers, the abstracts of papers. We thought it was simple, but it's no longer simple. This is a very common trend. So let's just go through it again. So we've got the knowledge about the early and middle Pleistocene hominin record of China is steadily increasing owing to the ongoing implementation of paleoanthropological surveys and excavations. Yet relatively little has been paid to the effects of climate variability on hominin populations in China and its influence on the archaeological site distributions and hominin behaviours. Self-explanatory. The Mid-Pleistocene climate transition, or the MPT, dating to between 1.2 million years ago and 700,000 years ago in Eastern Asia, is characterized by significant changes in the length and intensity of glacial interglacial cycles and in monsoon intensity and terrestrial conditions, which have been implicated in influencing the occupational history of basins within China. Here, the Middle Pleistocene transition is examined relative to archaeological site distribution across China to determine potential long-term geographic and behavioural effects on hominin populations before, during and after this critical period. So that all makes sense. Changes in the geographical distribution of hominins are demonstrated across the Middle Pleistocene transition, with significant shifts in the number of sites in high and low latitudes, likely as a response to changing ecosystems. So if you have kind of a forested area, that forested area disappears over a period of many tens of thousands of years, or maybe even hundreds of thousands of years. You'll have a changing, it'll have a knock-on effect in how humans interact with the landscape. That is a very kind of brief way of summarizing what the paper has to offer. Technological innovations, including the development of large cutting tools, which is all capital letters, so that'll be LCTs, occur in the Middle Pleistocene transition, and afterwards possibly a response to the formation of open habitats in South China, which is kind of just what I've mentioned, where you may have a kind of a forested environment, and then the climatic changes in South China meant that there was more open habitats, so less trees and more open kind of grassland-like environments. Geographic and behavioural shifts in the hominin record challenge traditional views about the long-term conservative nature of the biological and cultural evolution of hominins in Eastern Asia, and instead demonstrate dynamic responses of population to ecosystem changes across the early and middle Pleistocene. Now, my interest has been piqued into this, so I'm just going to go into the conclusion. The aim of this paper was to address how latitudinal variability in the early and middle Pleistocene may have affected early hominin settlement patterns and behaviours. Our analysis indicate that significant biological and cultural changes occurred across the prior to, during and after Middle Pleistocene transition, the MPT. It is clear from this study that to properly understand the hominin evolution in China, interdisciplinary archaeological projects must be established in the future, integrating paleoclimatic and paleoecological analyses with archaeological studies. This will allow us to better understand the relationship between changes in terrestrial environments and the expansion, contraction and extinction of hominins, and how populations responded to fluctuations in ecological settings. It will also allow us to examine how early hominins reacted similarly to or different from other mammals to significant changes in environment, ultimately permitting investigation of how Homo sapiens was set apart from other members of the genus Homo, becoming the most populous and geographically extensive human species ever to occupy Eastern Asia and the world. Now, I'm just going to go back up to the introduction. Usually when I used to tackle one of these papers, what I would do is I would read the abstract, obviously, read the introduction, read the conclusion, then read the discussion. And if I had read the discussion and my curiosity was still piqued, I'd read the results, but only if I absolutely had to. I think for most of us, reading the introduction, the conclusion, and then the discussion is enough. It really is enough, unless you are a specialist in the area that the paper is looking at. Eastern Asia is well known for its long sequences of Quaternary terrestrial sediments, which have supplied detailed information about changes in environments and the history of hominin occupation. Multiple geological and sedimentary studies of Quaternary deposits have been conducted across China, including in the Loess Plateau and the Nihuan Basin in the north, and in the red soil sequences and the cave stalagmites in the south, providing novel information about paleo-environments in Eastern Asia over the long term. Alongside this research, archaeological investigations have been conducted, leading to new discoveries and insights about the hominin records in the early and middle Pleistocene. African records have been investigated relative to environmental change and the evolution of hominins, with intensive interdisciplinary efforts being implemented in recent years. And they name a good few very key papers like Potts, Maslin, Levin, Camposano, and Pickering. However, few systematic and coordinated research efforts have been conducted in Eastern Asia to bridge climatic history with its rich paleoanthropological record. Therefore, it is imperative to initiate studies on early and middle Pleistocene records in Eastern Asia in order to better understand the relationship between climate change and the evolution of hominins, including potential changes in their geographical distribution and behavioral responses to ecosystem changes. Bay et al. 2018. Along these lines, advancements have been made to address such issues as indicated by the following three studies. So they go into a little bit more detail with very specific studies on the relationship between environment and the hominin record. A comprehensive study of the geographical distribution of hominins in China was conducted by Bay et al. In 2018, who examined the early to late Pleistocene records. The investigators concentrated their study on sites with hominin fossils and found that early Pleistocene and middle Pleistocene populations were mostly restricted to southern and central China. However, by the late and middle Pleistocene, the researchers observed that population expansions occurred more regularly into northern China, noting that sites were sometimes located distant from water sources, perhaps as a consequence of novel behaviours. Though important new insights were gained from this work, the study concentrated on hominin fossil distributions with limited examination of the archaeological record, somewhat hampering geographic and climatic interpretations. So, while the paper by Bay et al. Was a lovely start, there was some issues with and some restrictions in the discussion of the archaeological record, which made the discussion of the geographic and climatic interpretations questionable. Centering on the Qinling mountain range, examined, it was Sun et al. 2018, same year, the consequence between glacial interglacial conditions and hominin occupations. The analysts found that archaeological sites were present in the region between 1.2 and 700,000 years ago, and demonstrated that the Qinling mountain range had, or the Qingling, I think, is it Qingling mountain range, had, I'm from Ireland, so anything with Q is going to be Qu, had favourable, like Quinn, favourable environments in contrast to the colder, drier areas of the north. After about 600,000 years ago, longer and warmer interglacial environments were established, providing the optimal environments for hominin occupation. Hominin settlement was considered relatively continuous from about 1.2 million years ago to 500,000 years ago, though human occupation declined after 50,000 years ago, which was considered to be a product of changes in climate and human adaptations. Critical insights were gained in the occupational history of the Jingling Mountain Range region, and though wider geographic interpretations were made, the data was limited to a single region. So the first one, there was limited discussion of the archaeological record. In the second paper by Sun et al., it was a very focused region of this Qinling mountain range. And then the final paper is the population history of the Nihuan Basin in northern China has recently been investigated by an interdisciplinary team of earth scientists and archaeologists, Yang et al., this year actually. Though a number of key sites were present along the sedimentary sequence, considerable gaps in the archaeological record were noticed between 1.5 and 1.4 million years ago, between 1.3 and 1.2 million years ago, 1 million years ago and 900,000 years ago, and finally 800,000 years ago to 400,000 years ago. The lack of archaeological sites in the basin during these periods were considered to be the consequence of inhospitable climatic conditions in northern latitudes, in contrast to the situation found in southern China. Further, Yang et al. 2020 further argued that innovations in stone toolmaking may be a consequence of the initiation of the Mid-Pleistocene climatic transition, requiring adaptive changes to ecosystem change. As in the Qinling mountain range study, the Nihuan Basin study was limited in to a single region, providing a glimpse into hominin climatic adaptations in a particular area. And then just to kind of summarize that then, this team of scientists kind of summarized the end of the introduction. Though the foregoing studies have provided significant insights concerning the early and middle Pleistocene environmental hominin records of China, it is unfortunate that so far large-scale, high-resolution, integrated interdisciplinary studies have not been implemented, equivalent to, for example, the hominin sites and paleo lakes drilling project in Eastern Africa. However, despite this fact, site records in China are available and accumulating at a rapid rate, indicating that it is possible to examine broad, long-term trends in hominin environmental interactions, as illustrated in the foregoing East Asian examples, and coincident with European paleo demographic models, like ones given by their Dennell et al. In 2011 and MacDonald et al. In 2012. Therefore, here we combine and examine the fossil and archaeological record throughout China and across the MPT to assess the effects of climate change on hominin occupation history in the early and middle Pleistocene. Given the potential importance of the MPT in structuring terrestrial ecosystem changes, we examine the responses of hominins before, during, and after this critical period. In addition, we pay particular attention to fossil and archaeological site distribution patterns and innovations in stone toolmaking. So, the previous papers focused on very specific areas, but the criticism levelled at all of them is that they didn't do a huge study, a huge analysis. I suppose the beauty of the smaller studies is that they're nicely focused and you're less, I suppose, prone to criticisms because you're kind of focused in on a particular area. And I think that's probably going to be one of the criticisms of this paper, is that looking at such a wide area, there's going to be variables that this paper is going to miss out on. But it has to be done. Somebody has to start it. Somebody has to, and this team has, it seems, started this work. So I'm going to leave it at that now for the moment. I've done enough of a read through there. Let me know what you think of this paper. I'm going to include some of the. Let me know what you think of this paper. It's a very interesting one. The one thing the one thing I like about it, and the one thing that it illustrates, I suppose, that really kind of stands out to me, is that they really kind of, in the introduction, they really set the scene for why this study is necessary. So they basically say, well, there's a proliferation of sites throughout mainland China. Lots of work has been done, but that work hasn't focused on a wide expanse, a wide open area. And so we think this paper is warranted because it expands on the work of those tiny little areas, puts them into a wider context, and gives an overarching theme or a suggestion of a dynamic that's taking place between the climate and the hominins. What the hominins are doing in response to climatic changes. You have the interglacial glacial periods in the north, and then you have got the monsoonal activities in the south. And how are those waxing and waning of the monsoonal and glacial activities, how are they having an effect on the environment and then the hominins as a result? So let me know what you think, and the link will be down in the description as you would expect. Check it out for yourselves, and until the next video, goodbye.